finally made it. They were in slavery in Egypt as Joseph was in Egypt. Jacob brings his family down to Egypt at the end of Genesis. And then in the book of Exodus, Yahweh goes into Egypt and leads the people out of Egypt and brings them to Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, he affirms, "These are my people." He enters into covenant through Moses. And then the Lord gives them laws and instruction for building his tabernacle so he can dwell in their midst. And then at the end of Exodus, then the Lord descends and he is now dwelling with his people. And in Leviticus, the Lord then provides instruction from his tent dwelling in their midst about how they will then, how he will stay in their midst through holiness and atonement and sacrifice. And then in the book of Numbers, we see additional laws, but then the people finally make that trek from Mount Sinai and they make it to the edge of the promised land. And here in the book of Deuteronomy, the people have not made it in. They're like at the 1 yard line, and they are finally going to seemingly make it in. And so the book of Deuteronomy then records Moses' final words as he is going to die to this new generation who is about to enter into the promised land, the book of Deuteronomy. So, Deuteronomy. In Hebrew, this title is Ele Hadebarim, which literally means these are the words. And you can see the Greek here is Deuteronomium. That's where we get the English title, which literally means second law. These are the words, again, that's the introduction for the book of Deuteronomy, hence that's why the title is Ele Hadavarim. But second giving of the law, the reason it is called this is because if you read Deuteronomy, especially like Deuteronomy 5, which is which is the Ten Commandments, and other instruction within the book has already been given. It's been given whether it's in the book of Exodus or Leviticus, but not all laws in Deuteronomy were given previously. Like Deuteronomy 17, which has laws about Israelite kings. That doesn't appear in Exodus or Leviticus. But at least the Ten Commandments are re-given in Deuteronomy 5, and there are other laws as well that are just restated. And so, literary flow. Now that Israel has come to the doorstep of Canaan, Deuteronomy provides a sermonic law code to the second generation. So again, it's important to remember here that these laws are really given in the form of a sermon from Moses as he is about to die. And so chronologically, Deuteronomy covers a remarkably short amount of time, really covering Moses' final sermon, his final days, and death on Mount Nebo outside of the Promised Land. Because if you recall, Moses was not permitted to enter into the Promised Land because he struck the rock. And so he's going to die at the end of Deuteronomy just prior to going into the Promised Land. And so that leads us to this, which is quite fascinating, and I'm excited to talk about it with you. And that is, we've talked about like literary structure for these different books that help us to kind of get a sense of what's going on. Well, Deuteronomy is modeled after a suzerain vassal that is a covenant treaty. So you can see here I have this this little picture from a really helpful book, what the Old Testament authors really cared about. And you can see here first on the right that ancient Near Eastern treaties, which we have discovered, whether it's in Assyria or Babylon or Hatti, they kind of they kind of differ in certain places, but there tends to be an overall flow of them, which begins with a title, a prologue, then stipulations or laws, a document clause, a public recitation, and then they conclude with blessings and curses. Now, there's actually a similarity to the book of Leviticus, which also had stipulations and then blessing and curses that followed it. But there's just sort of this normal flow. Hey, when a dominant superpower takes over a smaller nation, they would make a treaty with them. And that treaty typically would say something like, I am king of this place, and I have conquered you, I have done these things, therefore you need to do these things. And if you do these things, then good things will happen. If you don't do these things, then bad things are going to happen to you. That's kind of the normal flow. And you can see here then on the left side of this screen that Deuteronomy is pretty stinking similar to this. There is a superscription that is, hey, we've now come to the land of Canaan. And then you have Moses' sermons and these are really the first sermon is really his historical prologue. And this is where Moses is going to remind the people, hey, remember how the Lord brought you out of Egypt and he defeated all these kings and like all of these great things. Well, that's like a historical prologue. And then you have these sermons where Moses reminds the people of now what they have to do. So because Yahweh brought you out from the land of Canaan and has entered into covenant with you and protected you, well, you need to follow him. And that's what Moses' second and third sermon really focus on. Moses then sings, leads people in singing a song, he blesses them. And in these blessings, he reminds the people, if you do what I am telling you, you're going to live. If you don't do what I'm telling you, then you're going to die. So there's this easy flow to follow in the book of Deuteronomy, and this has significant implications then for how we understand the book of Deuteronomy. Pardon me as I'm switching my screens here. But structural implications. There's one theologian who said structure is theology, and you can kind of see why here, because the structure of the book has major implications for how we then interpret the book. And the first implication is this. Yahweh's saving initiative, it grounds the second giving of the law. His saving initiative grounds the second giving of the law. I'm going to take a drink of my tea here. So what does that mean? So before the Lord provides a thorough list of laws about how they are to live, the Lord first reminds the people of what he has done for them. And this is really important because ethics in the Bible, they flow from a relationship. In the same way I mentioned this with holiness in our lecture on Leviticus, holiness is relational. Holiness flows from being in relationship with Yahweh. Well, in Deuteronomy, the Lord provides laws because of what he has done for his people. Because he has elected them, because he's protected them, because he saved them. The laws flow from this relationship he has with his people. And that leads us to what is the core of the second giving of the law, the book of Deuteronomy. At its core, Israel's response to God, it must be that of love. And this is Deuteronomy 6, 4-5. Hear, and that is the Hebrew word is Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. I think this establishes monotheism. Israel, Judaism, Christianity is monotheistic. So what, verse 5, do the people do? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. This three-pronged response to God's goodness is the essence of the law. The Lord calls the people to love him with all their heart, their soul, and with all their might. And Jesus actually quotes this when somebody asks him, what is the greatest commandment? And he quotes the Shema. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And yet, Deuteronomy, there's this interesting part here at the conclusion. Moses' final sermon, it anticipates a new covenant people with a new heart. We see this in Deuteronomy 30. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring so that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. Deuteronomy, it presupposes a wicked people who have something wrong with them, who cannot fully love the Lord. And so Moses says, don't worry, there's going to be a day where God's people have a circumcised heart. That is a renewed, new, loving heart that then enables them to love God with all of their heart. And so Deuteronomy, it is beautiful, right? There's this emphasis on loving God, but then there's also, just like with the other books we've read in the Pentateuch, there's this anticipation of what is to come. God is going to do something with his people. And so that leads us here to our important takeaways. Our first important takeaway is that now that Israel has come to the doorstep of Canaan, again, they're at like the 1 yard line to use a football term. Deuteronomy provides a sermonic law code to the second generation as they're about to enter into the land. Deuteronomy emphasizes the essence of covenant is love. God does not want robots, he wants people who love him. And that is what the essence of Deuteronomy, that is what Deuteronomy emphasizes. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love him with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. You love him with all your being. And yet, with this, the book of Deuteronomy anticipates when Yahweh will create a redeemed people who love him. We'll talk about this as especially when we go through the book of Isaiah and Jeremiah. But the prophets then pick up on this language and they talk about how the Lord is going to make a new people for himself. And that people is going to have a circumcised heart. They're going to have a heart that is new, renewed, rejuvenated. And these people are going to love the Lord and they're going to be blessed by the Lord because they're going to do what the Lord says to do. And so that's the book of Deuteronomy. We have covered all 5 books of the Pentateuch, and that now leads us to our next set of lectures, which are going to focus on historiography, primarily historiographical works, and also prophetical works. And I can't wait to do that with you.